gone in a crowd. Imagine a hillside, families spread out on tarps, the air smelling faintly of earth and new bamboo shoots, children running between the clusters of adults, laughter, conversation. Someone calls out a joke, and a ripple of chuckles moves through the group. And then, one child is not where she was 2 breaths ago. That is the moment we'll sit with today. I'm Maya Ellison, and this is Still Unanswered, a podcast where we carefully examine unresolved cases with skepticism, empathy, and a refusal to sensationalize grief. Today, we're focusing on the disappearance of Yuki Onishi, who vanished during a crowded bamboo shoot digging event. This episode deals with a missing child. It may be difficult for some listeners. Please prioritize your well-being. Pause, skip, or step away if you need to. There's no music here, just spoken word and quiet pauses to let facts land. Before we go further, I want to say something to frame this conversation. We will stick to what is publicly known, separate facts from questions, and avoid speculation that targets private individuals. For context and nuance, I'm joined by Dr. Hiroko Sato, a criminologist and lecturer in victimology who has worked with missing persons cases and with how authorities communicate during these investigations. Hiroko, thank you for being here.
Maya, thank you for having me. I'm honored to be part of this careful conversation.
By the way, when I say Yuki Onishi in this episode, I'll be referring only to the publicly reported details of her disappearance. We won't invent new facts or draw conclusions that aren't supported by evidence. Okay, let's set the scene. The bamboo hillside where the event took place is, by most accounts, a seasonal, community-oriented outing. Families come together to dig for spring bamboo shoots, something ordinary, local, and familiar. The ground is sloped in places, with clumps of bamboo and underbrush marking the edge of a tree line. Visibility can vary depending on the density of the grove and the angle of the slope. It's not wilderness, and yet it's not an open field either. There are pockets of cover, small paths, and, in some spots, a steep drop or shallow gullies.
That description is important. In Japan, seasonal events like these are communal. Parents, grandparents, neighbors often attend. People expect to keep an eye on their children, yes, but they also trust the gathering as a safe place. That trust shapes behavior, less hypervigilance, more relaxed movement, which is precisely why, when a child disappears, the community is stunned, because it feels outside the ordinary.
Right. Reports indicate the day itself had typical conditions: daytime hours, decent weather, enough light to see across much of the site. Again, these are the details released publicly. The shock is that an ordinary family outing turned suddenly, heartbreakingly, into a missing person case. We want to humanize Yuki for this episode, not turn her into a mere subject of investigation. What can you tell us, Hiroko, about who she was in the public record?
Publicly reported descriptions are limited, as they should be. We know she was a child who attended the event with family. Witnesses describe her variously as quiet and curious. Those are small, humanizing details that remind us she was not just a case number. The family's presence at the event followed a normal routine. They were participating in digging, moving between adults and other children, doing what families do on a spring outing.
And the timeline? This is where the mystery tightens. According to reports, Yuki was last seen while she was near the digging area, helping or playing close to a guardian. The window of time that she was unobserved is described as very short, seconds, perhaps a few minutes. That brevity is crucial.
It is. In many missing child investigations, the first few minutes are the most decisive. The difference between someone noticing a small disappearance and the moment an absence becomes apparent can be a handful of minutes. Community events create complicated sightlines, adults talking, bodies in the way, so even in a crowd, someone can step out of view quickly. That brevity is crucial.
Let's walk through the minute-by-minute reconstructed sequence as closely as we can. This is important, and again, I want to stress, these are based on reported witness statements and official updates that were made public, not on hidden documents. Witnesses say Yuki was last seen near the central digging area. She was with family members and other participants, some of whom were engaged in digging or carrying bamboo shoots. Someone, often an adult who later realized she was missing, saw she was no longer nearby and the call went out. That call led to an immediate local search by family and event staff.
To add detail, participants told investigators they initially assumed the child had wandered a short distance. Kids often do. That informed the very first actions, searching adjacent patches of bamboo, calling her name, scanning paths toward the more wooded edge. In such first response behavior, the assumption is usually that a child is lost, not that a crime has occurred.
Which matters because the shape of that initial assumption affects the early minutes. What areas are prioritized, who is alerted, whether formal authorities are called immediately, and what resources are requested. In Yuki's case, people began searching before police arrived, and when authorities did come, they began to coordinate a wider effort. So on to the immediate search. Describe what happened in those early hours.
Family, event staff, and volunteers searched the site at first. They checked the immediate slopes, the groves of bamboo, and nearby pathways. The geographic challenges, clusters of dense bamboo, undergrowth, and slopes, made a thorough, immediate visual search more difficult than it might sound. Reports indicate that local volunteers and residents joined the search in addition to official units when the alarm was raised.
Authorities were brought in, and a more formal search began. According to public accounts, police conducted grid searches and used canine units. The most striking investigative detail that was released publicly is that the scent trail, which the dogs followed, led to the edge of a nearby tree line and then stopped, abruptly.
That point deserves careful attention. When scent-tracking dogs follow a trail and it ends at a tree line, investigators are faced with several possible interpretations. The most dramatic is that the child was moved, carried into a vehicle, lifted and carried beyond the dog's scent, or otherwise removed from the area quickly. But there are also more prosaic possibilities. The scent could have been disrupted by another person crossing the track, by wind patterns, by water, or by contamination, mud, other animals, overlapping human scents from the crowd. But there are also more prosaic possibilities. The scent could have been disrupted by another person crossing the track, by wind patterns, by water, or by contamination, mud, other animals, overlapping human scents from the crowd.
Let's pause for a moment because I want to unpack the scent tracking process for listeners who may not be familiar. Hiroko, could you explain how these dogs work and what it means when a trail drops off?
Of course. Scent-tracking dogs are trained to follow an individual scent signature. They pick up minute particles of skin cells, sweat, dust, called scent cones, that create a trace. Handlers work with the dogs, interpreting behavior to follow direction. But scent trails are fragile. A rain shower can wash traces away, a strong wind can disperse particles, a river or stream can disrupt continuity. Crowds introduce many overlapping human scent paths, which can confuse a dog. When a scent stops suddenly at a particular location, it raises questions. Was the person removed from the ground surface? Was their scent covered, diluted, or diverted? Or did the dog lose the trail due to fatigue or handler error? Dogs are powerful tools, but humans interpret their signals, and human error can happen.
So, an ended trail is suggestive, but not definitive. The narrative that often circulates, dogs traced her to the edge and then the scent vanished, is true as a reported fact, but it does not, on its own, prove any single explanation.
Exactly. It is a fact that must be contextualized. In public discussions, people often extrapolate from that one detail to arrive at a single definitive story. In responsible analysis, we hold multiple hypotheses in mind and weigh them against other evidence, which in this case is limited in the public record.
Let's go through those hypotheses carefully, starting with what was publicly considered less likely or ruled out. First, accidental fall or injury. Authorities and volunteers searched the terrain, checked gullies, wells if any were nearby, waterways, any place a child might be injured and unable to call out. Do we know how thorough those checks were, and whether certain areas were definitively cleared?
Public reporting describes searches of the immediate and surrounding terrain, but it's not the same as a fully transparent inventory of every location checked. Typically, when police search for a missing child on uneven terrain, they check likely hazards, ravines, streams, thick underbrush, and structures. But absence of public detail about every spot does not mean they weren't searched. It means those search logs are not always released. We should avoid assuming that because documentation is absent publicly, it was not done. On the other hand, transparency can be limited, and that lack of public information creates legitimate frustration and questions.
Next, animal attack. Some listeners will wonder whether wildlife might be responsible. How plausible is that in this context?
It depends on the local fauna. In many populated parts of Japan, truly predatory encounters with humans, especially children, are extremely rare. An animal attack of that sort typically leaves evidence: torn clothing, blood, tracks, or remains. No such details were publicly reported. From a criminological perspective, the absence of those signs, combined with the sudden end of the scent trail at a human boundary, the tree line, pushes animal attack lower on the list of probable explanations, based on available public information.
Then there's the wandering off hypothesis. The child got separated and became lost. Early on, team members apparently thought this was possible. Why did that scenario become less likely over time?
If a child wandered and became lost in rough terrain, you generally expect to find some sign: footprints, disturbed foliage, a trace, particularly within a short radius. Also, if an extensive local search expands through the hills and wooded areas without finding the child, the probability of simple wandering decreases. Again, we're relying on what the authorities disclosed. Over time, if thorough searches yield no trace and scent tracking suggests removal across a human boundary, the wandering hypothesis becomes less tenable, though it cannot be entirely ruled out without complete search records.
Now we enter the domain of abduction. This is difficult to say aloud because it carries such a heavy moral weight. But for the record, we must examine it. How feasible is it for someone to remove a child from a crowded event without being noticed?
There are different modes by which removal can occur. A snatch, violent and sudden, would likely attract attention and leave witnesses. Luring, where an adult gains a child's trust, works because it exploits normal social behaviors. People assume a responsible adult is acting with permission. A third method is to blend in. Someone who looks like a participant or volunteer can move closer to a small group without raising suspicion. Vehicles can be used if they're parked near edges of the event. A child could be lifted into a car in moments if the surroundings provide opportunity.
Culturally, Hiroko, how common are stranger abductions in Japan, and how does that context frame investigative assumptions?
Japan has relatively low rates of violent crime compared to many countries, and stranger abductions are statistically rare. That cultural context can shape how quickly authorities assume criminality. There's often a default assumption that a child has wandered or become lost rather than been forcibly taken. That affects the early allocation of investigative resources and how witnesses are questioned. But rare does not mean impossible. When it does happen, or when a child disappears with an unexplained scent trail ending, the possibility of abduction becomes a necessary part of the inquiry.
Listener question. Someone might think, if it was an abduction, why would no one see a suspicious vehicle or stranger? What do investigators consider when there are no clear eyewitnesses to a stranger in a crowd?
They look for patterns, vehicles registered nearby at the time, license plate sightings, CCTV from nearby roads or properties, and witness recollections of anyone unusually attentive to children. They also consider the possibility that a person acted like a parent or staff member, which is why investigators often ask detailed questions about who was traveling through which part of the site, who had access to tools or vehicles, and if anyone left abruptly. In many cases, the absence of a clear eyewitness doesn't mean no abduction occurred. It means we lack the combination of witness testimony and physical evidence to confirm it.
We should be explicit here. Public reports do not provide a definitive answer about whether an abduction took place. We only have signals, some suggestive, some absent, and that space of uncertainty is where harmful rumors can grow if we're not careful.
Exactly. It is also worth noting that in Japanese investigations, there is often a degree of information control intended to protect the integrity of the investigation. Restrictions on early release of details, protective handling of witness identities, and so forth. That can appear, to the public, as opacity, but it's part of a cautious investigative approach. That said, families and communities deserve clarity, and too much secrecy can erode public trust.
Let's talk about alternative theories people often encounter online: misidentification, accidental death with later concealment, or unusual environmental events. We need to address these without lending them undue weight. Hiroko, how do we responsibly discuss such theories?
We mark them clearly as speculation. Misidentification, someone seeing a child they thought was Yuki, is possible in a crowd, but it doesn't explain all the signals. Accidental death with later concealment carries implications of immediate criminal activity and would likely leave physical traces if the terrain was searched thoroughly. Rare environmental explanations, like sudden sinkholes or hidden hazards, are investigated, but again, they would normally leave some trace or be discovered by searchers. The responsible approach is to say, these are hypotheses that would require particular evidence to support them. Without that evidence, they remain possibilities, not conclusions.
And we must be firm about one ethical line. We will not accuse or imply guilt of specific private individuals, family members, event staff, neighbors, without verified evidence. That's not just a legal or reputational concern, it's a moral one. Grief can attract finger-pointing, and we will not participate in that.
I appreciate that. From a victimology perspective, families often face public suspicion and conspiracy when cases go cold. That compounds their trauma. Support, not suspicion, is the humane baseline.
Let's turn to investigative gaps. What are the unanswered questions that shape the case? First, why did no one see Yuki clearly after that final moment, despite the crowd? Second, why did the scent trail stop so abruptly at the tree line? Third, were there vehicles, strangers, or unusual behaviors noted but never publicly linked?
Those are the core mysteries. We also want to know, were all nearby properties and potential hazards fully searched? What does the full timeline of calls, deployments, and resource allocation look like in minute detail? Were any cameras on nearby roads or private cameras facing entry paths? Were witness statements recorded in full and cross-checked? Without public access to the full investigative file, including unredacted witness statements, search maps, and forensics, it's difficult for outsiders to evaluate the evidentiary weight of the possibilities.
It's important to note, missing information in the public doesn't necessarily mean investigators failed. It may mean those documents are withheld to protect witness identity or preserve investigative integrity. But that lack of disclosure produces an inevitable public knowledge gap, which fuels speculation. That's why we emphasize transparent, responsible reporting.
And it's worth mentioning practical constraints. Police departments have limited resources. Time is a critical factor. Evidence decays, witnesses' memories blur. In the hours, days, and weeks after a disappearance, investigations must triage what to pursue. That can leave family members feeling that not enough was done, even when officials did proceed diligently within their constraints.
Now, I want to lean in to the human cost. It's easy, in a long discussion of scent trails and search patterns, to forget the person at the center of this. Yuki was a child with a life and relationships. Her family continues to live with uncertainty. Hiroko, could you speak to how open cases like this affect families over the long term?
Ambiguous loss is a phrase we use in victimology. It's the loss without closure. Families can be trapped in a state of suspended grief, unable to fully mourn because they lack answers. That produces chronic stress, social withdrawal, and sometimes fractured relationships within communities. Families also have to manage public attention and invasive speculation. In some cases, families become advocates for policy changes or for renewed searches. In others, they withdraw to protect their privacy. There's no single reaction, but the emotional toll is deep and ongoing.
If the family has issued any public statements, expressions of hope, or requests to the community, let's summarize them respectfully.
Public statements, when released, typically express hope that anyone with credible information will come forward, request privacy during grieving, and sometimes ask the public to avoid spreading rumors. Those are reasonable appeals. They ask for tangible assistance, credible leads, and for compassion. We should honor that.
I'll say directly to listeners, if you think you have useful information, something verifiable like footage, a precise vehicle description, or a documented timeline, contact the official investigative channels cited by local authorities. Don't private message families or post speculative accusations online. That's both ethically and practically important. We've been talking about why some cases remain unsolved. Let's broaden that perspective for a moment. What are these systemic reasons a case like Yuki's might remain without resolution?
Several structural factors can contribute. First, missing early, decisive evidence, information that, if preserved, would make the difference. Second, rapid loss of physical traces, scent, footprints, transitory witness recollections. Third, limits in investigative resources or specialized training in certain regions. Fourth, social blind spots, where authorities or communities assume a child wandered rather than considering foul play, thereby delaying certain lines of inquiry. Lastly, even in advanced police systems, human error and imperfect memory play a role. These are not excuses, they are constraints to be acknowledged when we try to understand how an unsolved case can arise.
We should also say, being an unsolved case doesn't mean nobody knows. It means a combination of unknowns that remain legally or factually unproven. There could be people who have pieces of information but who don't realize their significance, or who are afraid to come forward. That's why public messaging that is compassionate and clear can be crucial.
Yes, investigations often benefit from a single verifiable tip that unlocks a larger narrative. A license plate sighting, a recorded conversation, household surveillance footage. Those details can come from unexpected places, and the way authorities frame their appeals can influence whether people step forward.
So, what can listeners do responsibly if they want to help? First, do not spread unverified rumors. Second, if you have verifiable information, contact official channels. Third, consider supporting organizations that assist families of missing persons, whether through donations, volunteer time, or advocacy for better search protocols and resources. Small, practical actions are more helpful than speculation.
And be mindful of the family's privacy. Sometimes people mean well, but cause harm by crowding grief. Respecting boundaries matters.
We're nearing the end of our time together. Let's calmly recap the essential facts we do have. It was an ordinary community bamboo shoot digging event. Yuki, a child, was attending with family. Within a short window, seconds to a few minutes, she was no longer where she had been. Local searchers and authorities were mobilized. Canine units followed a scent to the tree line and then lost the trail. Beyond that, publicly released information is limited, and multiple plausible explanations remain. That is, at once, what we know and what we don't.
That summary is accurate. It leaves open questions that merit sober, patient investigation. And it acknowledges the family's reality. No clean answers yet.
Before we close, a short reflection. Cases like Yuki's test us on how we hold uncertainty. It's tempting to latch on to a single dramatic explanation, to sleepwalk into certainty because it feels quieter than ambiguity. But ambiguity is part of the truth here. Honesty requires us to say, we don't have closure. We are left with a set of questions that deserve careful, continued attention.
And a practical note. There are ways the public can pressure for sustained, transparent investigative effort without resorting to rumor-mongering, such as supporting independent oversight, advocating for resources for missing persons units, and encouraging law enforcement to keep families informed while protecting evidence. Empathy paired with civic engagement can be constructive.
If anyone listening knows of credible channels for updates, official police pages, public notices, or community hotlines, please consult those. Do not take matters into your own hands in ways that could harm people or obstruct investigations. And please, if you are struggling emotionally after hearing this episode, seek support. The story is heavy by its nature. We'll close with a quiet thought. Yuki was a child who attended a spring event with her family. She remains missing. People who love her are living with not knowing. This program exists to illuminate the questions we can ask, to call attention to investigative gaps, and to do all of that without turning human suffering into entertainment.
Maya, thank you for doing this carefully. My hope is that this episode encourages informed compassion and not spectacle.
Thank you, Hiroko. And thank you to our listeners for joining us with restraint and care. Our next episode of Still Unanswered will examine a different, unresolved disappearance, with similar emphasis on humane reporting and thoughtful inquiry. For now, we leave this story as it stands, open, painful, and, for the time being, still unanswered. I'm Maya Unanswered. Good night.